Welcome to the deep dive. We are jumping straight into, well, a critical and, frankly, pretty shocking contradiction that seems to be emerging from our source material. It's about the recent ceasefire.
Right. The official goal, starting October 10th, was pretty clear. Suspend all military operations.
Exactly. But the reality we're seeing documented on the ground, it tells a very different story.
Yeah, what's fascinating here really is the tension. You've got that clear, publicly stated goal on one side, and then this visual evidence of ongoing, pretty systematic destruction on the other.
It really is systematic. Because despite the supposed pause, the scale of destruction hasn't actually stopped. We're anchored today by this really shocking statistic revealed by BBC Verify.
Which is?
Satellite images show Israel has destroyed more than 1,500 buildings. And this is in areas of Gaza still under its control since that ceasefire began.
Wow. Over 1,500 buildings gone after the war was supposedly over. I mean, that figure alone forces us to ask the central question here, doesn't it?
It does. Are these actions legitimate security measures, which is what the IDF claims? Or, are they a stark violation? A violation of the ceasefire terms and the laws of war?
That's the core issue we need to explore. Balancing the specific evidence, the visual proof of destruction, with these really complex legal and security arguments.
Okay, that's our mission then. Let's try and unpack this.
Okay.
So let's start with the evidence itself. BBC Verify presented this, it sounds like, quite remarkable forensic data analysis. How did they get to that 1,500 number? And crucially, where is this happening?
Well, the methodology is key here. It wasn't just looking at, simple before and after photos. They used a change detection algorithm based on radar imagery.
Okay, so using tech to basically spot where buildings had just vanished.
Precisely. And then, importantly, they followed up with manual confirmation, actually counting the visibly destroyed structures in the high-resolution images.
And the location, you mentioned this earlier, it matters hugely. This destruction happened primarily behind the yellow line.
That's right. The yellow line being that established boundary Israel agreed it would withdraw to as part of the ceasefire deal. So this is territory Israel controls.
Right.
And the researchers made a very important point, a caveat. The actual number could be quite a bit higher.
Really? Why is that?
Because satellite imagery just wasn't available for all the relevant areas for their entire assessment period. But honestly, even 1,500 is, well, it's a staggering figure on its own.
And crucially, this isn't necessarily about buildings damaged in the fighting before the ceasefire, is it?
Mm-hmm.
The sources describe entire neighborhoods just leveled, often in less than a month, apparently through controlled demolitions.
Yeah, that's the picture emerging. The observations detail that in places like Eastern Khan Yunis and near Abasan al-Kabira, the buildings often showed no visible structural damage beforehand.
So not rubble beforehand.
No, or not necessarily. No surrounding rubble suggesting recent combat. These were, houses, often described as intact. Some had gardens, trees, even small orchards nearby. It really suggests pre-planned, large-scale clearance, not just collateral damage from fighting.
That paints a very different picture. And to bring this data to life, there's the story of Lana Khalil. She was displaced to Al-Mawasi.
Yes, her testimony is powerful. She described her home area in Abasan al-Kabira as a heaven, full of farms and vegetables.
And what happened to it?
According to her, the Israeli military basically wiped it out. She's quoted saying, "The Israeli military left nothing to us, they demolished everything." And perhaps the most haunting detail
That's sad.
is that she said the former residents, huddled in their tents in Al-Mawasi, could actually hear the demolitions happening in the distance.
Wow. Hearing your home being destroyed after a ceasefire was declared, that's a visceral link between the satellite data and the human cost. This pattern seems consistent then, happening repeatedly in Israeli-controlled territory near that agreed perimeter.
It does seem to be a pattern based on the BBC's verification work.
Okay, so if this destruction is documented, it's massive, and it's happening behind the agreed line.
Right.
How do legal experts see this? We need to look at the ceasefire terms themselves, right? Based on that Trump 20-point peace plan.
We do, and that plan was actually very specific on this point. It stated, and I quote, "All military operations, including aerial and artillery bombardment, will be suspended."
Suspended, that seems clear enough.
It seems clear, and it's pretty difficult to argue that the deliberate, systematic destruction of over 1,500 buildings, many apparently undamaged beforehand, somehow fits under a suspension of military operations.
Dr. H.A. Hellier from RUSI, he certainly sees it that way. He was quite unequivocal, wasn't he?
He was. He stated this is definitely a violation of the ceasefire. But, and this is a big but in terms of real-world politics, he also noted that Washington, D.C. hasn't been willing to formally call it that, to recognize it as a violation.
So, politics aside for a moment, what about the fundamental laws of war? We have Adil Huck, a law professor at Rutgers, weighing in.
Yes, and Haig connects this directly to the broader laws of war. His focus is specifically on the prohibition against an occupying power destroying civilian property. There are rules about this.
Okay, so what's Haig's bottom line then? Is there any legal loophole, any exception that the IDF could claim here?
Well, the law does allow for exceptions, but they are very narrow. Destruction is only permitted if it's rendered absolutely necessary by military operations. And Haig clarifies that means combat or direct preparations for combat.
Combat during a ceasefire.
Exactly. Haig's argument is pretty straightforward. During a ceasefire, a period defined by the suspension of combat, he says it's simply not plausible that destroying over 1,500 civilian buildings on this scale has suddenly become absolutely necessary because of military operations. The timing and scale just don't seem to fit the legal exception.
It seems like a strong argument. And before we get to the IDF's counter-argument, there's that other point from the original peace plan we should mention. Point 13.
Ah, yes, the infrastructure point.
Right. The terror infrastructure needed to be destroyed and not rebuilt. Okay. But, and this seems critical, it was supposed to happen under the supervision of independent monitors.
Independent monitors. And have we heard anything about these monitors actually being involved?
Nothing. The reports we reviewed make no mention of them being present or supervising these demolitions. It's a missing piece of the puzzle.
So, if the legal interpretation suggests this scale of destruction during a ceasefire is, well, highly questionable, potentially illegal,
yeah,
how does the IDF justify it? What's their side?
That's the crux of it, isn't it? They seem to be operating based on a very different reading of the agreement.
What's their official line?
The official stance given to B2C Verify was that they are acting in accordance with the ceasefire framework. Their whole justification seems to hinge on that clause in the agreement saying, all terror infrastructure, including tunnels, is to be dismantled throughout Gaza. They frame it as fulfilling that security mandate.
Okay, but dismantling terror infrastructure and destroying 1,500 mostly civilian buildings, homes, farms. How do they connect those two, especially undamaged buildings?
This is where the analysis from Aidan Shamir comes in. He's the former head of Israel's National Security Doctrine Department. Shamir offers a really key interpretation of the ceasefire's geography.
Go on.
His sources suggest, essentially, that the terms of the ceasefire, the suspension of military operations, they do not apply to the areas Israel currently controls. That is, the territory behind the yellow line.
Wait, so the ceasefire only applies in some parts of Gaza. How does that work if the goal is to end hostilities everywhere?
It seems counterintuitive, I agree. Yeah. But Shamir relays what he understands to be the governing view within certain Israeli security circles. It's basically that the ceasefire created two distinct zones.
Two zones.
Yeah. As he put it, based on his sources,
well,
Hamas is allowed to do what it wants in the territory it controls, and Israel is allowed to do what it wants in the territory it controls. Since this destruction is happening behind the yellow line in Israeli-controlled areas, they apparently view it as internally permissible action, not a breach of the agreement with Hamas.
That's quite an interpretation, a geographic loophole almost.
It seems like it. And the practical rationale given is purely about future security. Shamir's sources indicate a lack of trust. The IDF believes Hamas is unlikely to follow through with the later stages of the agreement.
So they're preparing for fighting to resume.
That seems to be the logic. They feel they must prepare the space for the continuation of the fighting. This involves clearing lines of sight, denying potential cover for ambushes, and, critically, dealing with long tunnel sections they believe exist under these areas.
And they mention ongoing threats.
Yes. They cite frequent attempts by Hamas operatives to infiltrate beyond the yellow line into the Israeli-controlled zone. So, for the IDF, eliminating these 1,500-plus buildings is framed as a necessary preventative security measure within their zone of control.
Okay, so let's synthesize this for the listener. You've got these two starkly opposing positions, right?
Absolutely. On one hand, you have the documented evidence satellite proof of mass destruction of civilian property happening during a declared pause in fighting. And legal experts are saying this looks like a violation of the laws of war.
And on the other hand,
you have the IDF's assertion. They claim these are necessary security actions focused on dismantling terror infrastructure and, crucially, permitted because they're happening behind the yellow line in an area where they believe the ceasefire restrictions don't apply to their actions.
So the core tension really boils down to this. Is this genuinely essential security work, clearing tunnels and preventing attacks as they claim? Or is it something else? Is it perhaps a unilateral effort to change the facts on the ground while the ceasefire technically holds?
That's precisely the danger that Hugh Lovett from the European Council on Foreign Relations highlights. He argues that these ongoing demolitions could actually jeopardize the entire peace plan in the long run.
How so? What's the risk he sees?
Lovett points to the perception this creates. It reinforces a sense that Israel is stalling its withdrawal and looking to create new permanent facts on the ground, much like, he suggests, has happened in the West Bank over decades.
And that feeling of bad faith that erodes trust.
Exactly. He says if this pattern continues, that perception, that sense that Israel isn't fully committed to the withdrawal implied by the ceasefire, becomes an increasingly greater threat to the maintenance of the ceasefire itself.
Because ultimately, you can't really have a stable ceasefire if one side suspects the other is just using the pause to reshape the territory they're supposed to eventually leave. It undermines the whole basis of the agreement.
Precisely. It breeds suspicion and makes future steps much harder.
So wrapping this up, we've really laid out a stark conflict today. We've seen the scale, over 1,500 buildings documented as destroyed by BBC Verify since the ceasefire began. And we've contrasted that with these two wildly different interpretations of the agreement itself.
Yeah, one interpretation calling it a clear violation of both the ceasefire terms and the fundamental laws of war regarding civilian property during occupation.
And the other claiming it's a justified, even necessary security action, permissible because it's happening within Israeli-controlled territory where, according to their reading, the main ceasefire constraints don't apply to them.
And threaded through all of this is that missing element we highlighted earlier. Point 13 of the peace plan, the part authorizing infrastructure destruction, specifically mandated it happen under the supervision of independent monitors.
Right. Monitors who seem to be completely absent from this process, as far as the reporting shows. And that lack of oversight, that lack of verification, it raises fundamental questions about accountability, doesn't it?
It really does. Yeah. Accountability and verification are often what separates a genuine agreement from just an assertion or a temporary pause.
Absolutely.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, to consider is this. What is the true cost, the true stability of any peace agreement? When the mechanisms for independent verification and accountability, the very mechanisms written into the plan, are simply missing in action. That's something worth exploring further.